Okay, good Saturday morning, and there's a picture of um, Colorado from I-25 near Trinidad in the southern part of the state from 2022. Another picture from Colorado, and there's me. And then a couple of pictures from Texas. That's near Uvalde, and it's the southern part of the state. And there's Dallas, and that's the condo I had in Dallas and Pleasant Grove, and that's the Cathedral of Hope. And let's I want to talk today about a Texas bill introduced by Brent Money, not likely to go anywhere. Um, it's HR 3399 in Texas. But what it would do is restrict gender affirming care to adults as well as minors for gender dysphoria. In other words, the hormone, the surgeries, and the hormones, the puberty blockers, the surgery, the hormones, and particularly the surgeries for adults, particularly the surgeries for adults. Um, and we've always said our main concern is minors, protecting minors, and that's been my concern about all of this, including what's going on in the schools and the pronouns and everything else as well, and the indoctrination and so forth. But now it seems to be spreading to adults. There's not very much likelihood that the bill will get sponsored and will pass, but the very idea that it would be proposed is disturbing. And um, just to unpack this a little bit, my whole perception of transgender people up until we were coming out of the pandemic is it was mostly adults who had fully transitioned. Everybody I knew personally was an adult who had personally transitioned. And I feel very strongly that as an adult that's fully transitioned can use their new sex and can use it as an identifier for the transition in practical sense in public is so complete that it just doesn't, and it's rare. There's not very many people, relatively speaking, who do it. Caitlyn Jenner notwithstanding. Um, that's just not a problem. And so, but I also don't like the whole idea that we generate a constructed group of people who claim to be a marginalized group or an oppressed group, and then particularly include minors in them and do it by self-identification only. A lot of people, you're hearing more that a lot of trans people don't transition at all. They just simply want to dress differently and be treated by what they claim they are. You're hearing that. I don't encounter that personally very much at all, but uh, you're hearing that, and that's an issue, and it's an issue with youth and everything. We've gone over that before, and I personally don't like the idea that you anchor rights by using um, equal protection and then create marginalized groups and protect people because they're members of groups. I'd rather look at the idea that somebody has a fundamental right to do something that they want to do and look at it that way in an individual level. And so does an adult, so then you could reasonably ask something, does an adult have the right to do this? The objection on the part of the right is that, well, you don't do that to cut off an arm or, because somebody has some sort of fetish about wanting to remove limbs or something. So why should we remove something that even removes fertility, even if the person doesn't want to have children? There's kind of an implied responsibility to be open to having them in the minds of many people. That's going to be more important, by the way, with the birth rate issue. So they don't want to allow adults, or some minority on the right don't want to allow adults to do this. And so um, they come up with a law that is spread from minors to adults. And again, the basic process should be if something is a fundamental right, um, but not explicitly stated in the Constitution or in the law, But if you want to not prohibit something, if you want to be free from having something prohibited, the general idea should be, is it consensual? Is it an adult who's doing it? Do they understand what they're doing cognitively? And is it harmless to the rest of society? Particularly in a practical sense, if something is very rare, then it's not very likely to impact society. Although that might leave the person feeling isolated if they don't have a longer group to belong to, it it still doesn't make very much difference to society. You might not, you might not, they might not be able to insist that the medical care be paid for by insurance or the government. That might be an issue. And, but that they have the right to do it with with somebody with transgender adults as we used to understand it. There shouldn't really be a problem with saying that, because we know that a few people we know that a few people do seem to have a genuine kind of issue. By the way, again, as I've said before, transgenderism is not the same thing as intersex. Most people who are intersex still have one reproductive system or the other. There is also an issue with some people feeling, and this is true, maybe the explanation for some very young trans children. That we say there aren't and isn't any such thing, but there is a situation where a very small number of people, their central nervous system doesn't seem to recognize all their internal organs properly. And that seems to be very hard to diagnose, in addition to all the other DSTs. And that might explain some of it, but it is very rare. And so we've always had this in schools. I'm told schools have always had a very small number of kids like this and have dealt with it privately and case by case. We had Gavin Grimm then in the 2000s, or more recently in Virginia. But we've always who wanted to, made a case in Virginia to transition. We've always had a very small number of youth, and it was so small, and then it started growing in the 2100s, and in the 2010s rather slowly, but I didn't really notice it pay much attention to it until after the pandemic, even though we were starting to hear more about it in 2017, 2018, because it didn't seem to be very important. But there does need to be sufficient gatekeeping when this is done, and maybe it should be permitted in very rare cases for minors, but only if there's very strict gatekeeping, which we don't seem to have, and which has been a big issue in Europe and in London, England particularly, and now in the United States they haven't caught it. But you need to be very sure that there's a real problem. Then there wouldn't be very many people, and you wouldn't really have enough people to have an oppressed group anymore. So that seems to be the problem from the left. But there's something else about this that worries me that I just wanted to mention. You can start thinking about gay rights again, not, gay men being dragged into this fight and being classified as part of the group, even though they're not directly affected and they're much more numerous. Think about the fact that after the AIDS epidemic, how bad and how terrible that was. I was living in Dallas at the time, and that's why I showed you some pictures from Dallas also, where the bill comes from. I was living in Dallas at the time, and we came out of this gradually, but with medicine, and particularly today we have pre-exposure prophylaxis, Truvada. And it would sound imaginable that a right-wing legislator would want to forbid that because they think that the behavior that it enables is immoral. Then you could go back and try to undo the Supreme Court case on gay marriage, and there are some people trying to do that in a few states. You've heard about that. Idaho, for one, and a few other states. And possibly even undo Lawrence Lawrence versus Texas in 2003, and go back to Hardwick versus Bowers in the 1980s. And um, that if you did, then the question of you could try a state might try to make PrEP illegal, or might try to interfere with protease inhibitors, which now are very effective for people who are infected with HIV. And there were a lot of problems at first in the early 90s and so forth, but now they're very effective. And when people take them, it doesn't seem like they have very many side effects or many problems. But of course, on the other side, people have made that claims for trans people with puberty blockers, and that's turning out to unravel. But so far as I know, PrEP and protease inhibitors are safe for gay men. During COVID, it seemed like the gay men I knew, particularly on the West Coast, nobody was getting it. Of course, they were living alone and so forth, but some of them continued to take the PrEP, even if they weren't active. And even though the coronavirus is not a retrovirus, it's reasonable that a drug like that might add more resistance. It is something we could have pursued more than we did. We wound up with other medications, but we could have looked at that more than we did, I think. So there's also a case in Colorado coming before the Supreme Court, brought by a child, about a free speech claim that religious therapists or people, if they have a religious belief, should be able to counsel patients, youth patients especially, in conversion therapy, either for, in the case of gay sexual orientation, or in the case of wanting to change gender. And that's this, and I'll give you the link to it from the SCOTUS blog. But yes, this is all very disturbing, that there is the possibility that other things could happen that affect the GLB as well as the T. And so something I've been wanting to discuss a little more from my own point of view, again, being dragged into this forcibly, which I didn't feel affected me, but it could affect me more than I thought it did. And so I just wanted to bring these up today. And, alarming stuff is going on. And I'll be talking to you about my own plans in more detail very soon. Hopefully I can do this by Monday. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that, about the Texas case, and possibly be prepared to hear other ideas proposed in state legislatures that might be very disturbing, or other cases brought before SCOTUS. Be prepared to deal with them. And I do thank you for listening.